In July of 1776, a group of men gathered in a small city on the edge of the British Empire and committed an act that, by the standards of their time, was nothing short of treason. They signed their names to a document that challenged the most powerful monarchy in the world and risked everything they owned, including their lives. At that moment, there was no guarantee they would succeed. In fact, the odds were stacked heavily against them. How did a collection of colonies, divided by geography, religion, and class, manage to break away from an empire that ruled the seas? And how did that rebellion give birth to a nation that would change the course of world history? To understand how the United States was founded, we have to step back into the 18th century, when North America was part of a vast and competitive Atlantic world. By the early 1700s, Britain had established 13 colonies along the eastern coast of the continent. These colonies were not created as a single unified project. Each had its own origins, economy, religious traditions, and political culture. New England was shaped by Puritan communities and maritime trade. The middle colonies were more diverse, with thriving ports and farms. The southern colonies relied heavily on plantation agriculture, built on the labor of enslaved Africans. Although these colonies were under British rule, they enjoyed a significant degree of self-government. Colonial assemblies controlled local taxes and laws, and many colonists saw themselves as loyal British subjects with the same rights as people living in England. For much of the early 18th century, Britain largely allowed this autonomy, focusing instead on managing its global empire and fighting wars against rival powers like France and Spain. That balance began to shift after the 7 Years' War, known in America as the French and Indian War. Britain emerged victorious in 1763, gaining vast new territories in North America. But victory came at a tremendous cost. The British government was deeply in debt and believed the colonies should help pay for their own defense. New taxes and regulations followed, including the Stamp Act and later the Townshend duties. From Britain's perspective, these measures were reasonable. From the colonists' perspective, they were a violation of long-standing rights. Ideas mattered too. The Enlightenment spread new ways of thinking about power, liberty, and government. Writers like John Locke argued that legitimate governments existed to protect natural rights and depended on the consent of the governed. These ideas circulated widely in the colonies through pamphlets, sermons, and newspapers, shaping how people understood their relationship with authority. This story matters because the founding of the United States was not inevitable. It was the result of growing tensions between empire and colony, between old loyalties and new ideas. What began as a dispute over rights within the British system would soon become a revolutionary movement that redefined what a nation could be. The break between Britain and its American colonies did not happen all at once. It unfolded over a decade of escalating conflict as political disputes hardened into open rebellion. After the Stamp Act sparked widespread protests, Britain repealed it, but also passed the Declaratory Act, asserting Parliament's right to tax the colonies in all cases whatsoever. This compromise satisfied no one. Colonists became increasingly suspicious of British intentions, while British leaders viewed colonial resistance as dangerous defiance. Tensions continued to rise through the late 1760s and early 1770s. British troops were stationed in colonial cities to enforce new laws, most notably in Boston. In 1770, a confrontation between soldiers and civilians resulted in the Boston Massacre, an event quickly used by colonial leaders to rally opposition against British rule. 3 years later, Parliament passed the Tea Act, intended to save the struggling British East India Company. Colonists saw it as another attempt to impose taxes without consent. In response, protesters boarded ships in Boston Harbor and dumped chests of tea into the water, an act that became known as the Boston Tea Party. Britain responded with force. The coercive acts, called the Intolerable Acts by colonists, closed Boston's port and curtailed Massachusetts' self-government. Rather than isolating the colony, these measures united many of the colonies in opposition. In 1774, representatives from 12 colonies gathered at the First Continental Congress, not yet to declare independence, but to coordinate resistance and demand the restoration of their rights. Armed conflict began the following year. In April 1775, British troops marched toward Concord to seize colonial weapons. They were met by colonial militias at Lexington and Concord, where shots were fired that would echo far beyond New England. The American Revolutionary War had begun. Within months, colonial forces besieged Boston, and the Second Continental Congress convened. This body would become the central leadership of the rebellion, appointing George Washington as commander of the Continental Army. At first, many colonists still hoped for reconciliation. Even after fighting began, Congress sent the Olive Branch Petition to King George III, pledging loyalty while asking for peace. The king rejected it and declared the colonies in open rebellion. This rejection marked a turning point. Support for independence grew rapidly, fueled by Thomas Paine's pamphlet Common Sense, which argued that monarchy itself was illegitimate and independence was the only path forward. In July 1776, the Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence. Drafted primarily by Thomas Jefferson, it listed grievances against the king and proclaimed that all men are created equal, endowed with natural rights. The Declaration did not end the conflict, it transformed it. What had been a rebellion within the British Empire became a war for national independence, fought against one of the most powerful states in the world. The war that followed was long, uncertain, and costly. The Continental Army faced shortages, defeats, and internal divisions. Victory was far from assured, but through persistence, leadership, and crucial foreign alliances, especially with France, the revolutionary cause survived. Step by step, the struggle for independence moved toward its decisive moment, where the fate of the colonies and the possibility of a new nation would finally be determined. The decisive turning point in the founding of the United States came in the autumn of 1781, after years of brutal and uncertain war. By this point, the revolutionary conflict had spread far beyond the original colonies. It had become a global struggle, drawing in European powers eager to weaken Britain. Yet for the American cause, survival still hung by a thread. The Continental Army remained underfunded and exhausted, and public support wavered as the war dragged on with no clear end in sight. The climax unfolded at Yorktown, Virginia. British General Charles Cornwallis moved his army to the coast, expecting support and evacuation by the Royal Navy. Instead, a rare convergence of events shifted the balance. American forces under George Washington coordinated with French troops led by the Comte de Rochambeau, while the French Navy blocked British reinforcements at sea. For weeks, Allied forces surrounded Cornwallis's army, cutting off escape and pounding British positions with artillery. In October 1781, Cornwallis surrendered. Though fighting would continue in limited forms, Yorktown shattered Britain's will to continue the war. It was not just a military defeat, but a political one. The loss convinced many in Parliament that reconquering the colonies was no longer worth the cost. For the Americans, the victory validated years of sacrifice and confirmed that independence was no longer a distant dream, but an achievable reality. The surrender at Yorktown marked the moment when the United States effectively won its independence. It demonstrated that a coalition of colonies, supported by foreign allies and bound by shared ideals, could defeat the most powerful empire of the age. The revolution had crossed the point of no return. The question was no longer whether the United States would exist, but what kind of nation it would become. With the fighting largely over, the task of building a nation began. In 1783, the Treaty of Paris formally ended the war and recognized the United States as an independent country. What followed was a period of uncertainty and experimentation. The former colonies were now sovereign states, loosely bound together under the Articles of Confederation. This first national framework deliberately limited central authority, reflecting deep fears of tyranny. But it soon became clear that the government it created was too weak to manage debt, regulate trade, or maintain stability. Economic hardship, internal unrest, and diplomatic weakness exposed the flaws of the new system. Events like Shays' Rebellion highlighted how fragile the young republic truly was. In response, leaders from across the states gathered in Philadelphia in 1787 to revise the Articles. Instead, they created an entirely new framework of government. The Constitution established a stronger federal system with checks and balances, dividing power among branches to prevent the rise of another monarchy. The ratification of the Constitution was fiercely debated. Federalists argued that a strong national government was necessary for survival. Anti-Federalists warned that it threatened individual liberty. The eventual compromise included the Bill of Rights, which guaranteed fundamental freedoms such as speech, religion, and due process. These amendments reflected the revolutionary ideals that had driven independence in the first place. The founding of the United States was both radical and incomplete. The ideals of liberty and equality coexisted with slavery, the exclusion of women in political rights, and the dispossession of Native American nations. Historians continued to debate whether the founders intended a fully democratic society or a more limited republic. What is clear is that the system they created was designed to evolve, shaped by future generations. Why does this story still matter? Because the questions raised at the nation's founding have never gone away. Who should have a voice in government? How much power should the state hold? How do ideals become reality? The United States was not born fully formed. It was built through conflict, compromise, and contradiction, and its founding continues to shape political life today. The founding of the United States was driven by bold ideas and imperfect people. Do you think the American Revolution truly fulfilled its promises of liberty and equality, or did it leave too much unfinished? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you found this exploration of history engaging, consider liking the video to support the channel. And if you want more long-form documentaries that dig deep into how the modern world was shaped, make sure to subscribe for more stories from the past.